The desert world of Aritus had a way of making every decision feel like a mistake. Scout Matteo Cross discovered this approximately 6 seconds after stepping off the survey skiff and realizing the sand was moving, not drifting, not blowing, moving. It shifted beneath his boots in slow, deliberate ripples, as if something vast and unseen breathed beneath the surface. The pale grains glowed faintly under the harsh, white sun, reflecting light with crystalline precision. Aridus did not shimmer like Earth deserts. It gleamed, like broken glass spread across an endless wound. Matteo paused at the edge of a shallow ridge and stared across the horizon. The planet's twin suns hung at different heights in the sky, one large and merciless, the other smaller and dimmer, like an assistant reluctantly participating in the torture. He tapped the side of his helmet. "Survey log, entry 1, he said. Aritus is officially the worst vacation destination I have ever visited." His helmet AI, which he had named Helen for no scientifically valid reason, responded in its usual calm tone. "Noted. Would you like to categorize the reason as environmental hostility, psychological discomfort, or existential dread?" Matteo considered this seriously. "Yes," he said. The sand shifted again. He froze. There were no wind readings, no seismic warnings, no alerts, just movement. Matteo slowly crouched and pressed his gloved hand into the surface. The grains parted easily, flowing around his fingers with unnatural smoothness. It felt less like touching sand and more like touching something that tolerated his presence. He stood up immediately. "Nope," he muttered. "I've made a huge mistake." His mission was simple: observe, record, leave. He was not here to fight, negotiate, or heroically sacrifice himself for future diplomatic relations. He was here because scouts were expendable in ways ambassadors were not. He activated his wrist scanner. A pale blue holographic display expanded into view, mapping terrain, temperature gradients, and atmospheric density. Everything appeared stable, too stable. Aridus was a border world, officially unclaimed, unofficially contested by beings known only through fragmented reports and very unhelpful mission briefings that included phrases like adaptive desert dwellers and non-hostile unless provoked. Matteo did not know what provoked them. He suspected existing might qualify. He took one careful step forward. The sand collapsed beneath his foot, not deeply, not violently, but enough to shift his balance. He stumbled, caught himself, and froze again. Helen spoke in his ear. "Your coordination appears compromised." "Thank you, Helen," Matteo said. "Your emotional support is invaluable. I am programmed for accuracy, not emotional support." "That explains a lot." He scanned the horizon again. Nothing. No structures, no movement, just endless white desert and two suns that clearly had personal vendettas against him. He took another step. This time the sand did not merely shift. It opened. Figures rose from beneath the surface in perfect silence, their forms emerging as if assembled from the desert itself. Pale armor curved organically around their bodies, reflecting light in smooth, seamless contours. Their helmets concealed their faces, but their posture communicated everything Matteo needed to know. He was in trouble. Matteo raised his hand slowly. "Hello," he said carefully. "I was just leaving." None of them responded. One stepped forward, taller than the others. Its movements were precise, controlled, efficient. Matteo considered running. He calculated his chances. He stopped calculating immediately. "Before we escalate this," Matteo said, "I would like to formally apologize for whatever I did." The figure tilted its head slightly. Matteo was encouraged by this. It suggested curiosity. Curiosity was better than immediate vaporization. He smiled inside his helmet. "I'm Matteo," he offered. "Scout, explorer, terrible at deserts." The figure raised its hand. Matteo's helmet shut down. The world vanished. Darkness swallowed his vision as every system in his suit powered off simultaneously. His scanner died. His communications died. Even Helen died, which he found personally offensive. "Rude," Matteo said aloud. Something struck the back of his legs. He fell. Hands, firm, unyielding, gripped his arms. He struggled briefly, more out of principle than expectation of success. It did not help. He was lifted effortlessly, carried. The last thing he saw before his helmet fully depowered was the sand closing again behind them, erasing all evidence he had ever been there. When his vision returned, it did so slowly. Light emerged first, pale and indirect, then sensation, cold stone beneath his hands, air that tasted dry and ancient. Matteo groaned and pushed himself upright. His helmet was gone. His boots were gone. His dignity remained under review. He sat inside a circular chamber carved from the smooth white stone. The walls curved seamlessly, without joints or seams. No visible door, no visible technology, just containment. He rubbed his face. Well, he muttered, this could be worse. Could it? The voice was calm. Matteo froze. He turned slowly. She sat across the chamber, her back resting lightly against the curved wall. Her posture was relaxed, but her eyes were focused, alert. She looked human at first glance. Her features were balanced, composed, striking without trying to be. Then he saw her ears, long, elegant, tapered into fine points that curved slightly backward. Not human, not entirely. She studied him with quiet interest, as if she had been waiting for him to wake. Matteo blinked. He glanced around the chamber again, as if hoping another explanation might appear. It did not. He pointed weakly at himself. I assume this is the part where I panic, he said. Her expression did not change. That would be understandable. Her voice was steady, controlled, unafraid. Matteo relaxed slightly. Well, he said, I'm Matteo, professional prisoner apparently. A faint pause, then she said, Kira. That was all. No rank, no explanation, just Kira. Matteo leaned back against the wall and exhaled. He had been captured on an alien desert world by beings who emerged from living sand, stripped of his equipment, and placed in a cell with an alien woman whose calm suggested she was handling this significantly better than he was. He considered his situation carefully. Then he nodded. Okay, he said. This is new. Time did not pass inside the chamber. It accumulated. Matteo Cross discovered this after what he estimated to be somewhere between 3 hours and 3 years of sitting barefoot on smooth alien stone. Without his helmet, without Helen, and without even the comforting illusion of control, he was forced to rely on the least reliable instrument he possessed, his sense of time. It was not performing well. He leaned his head back against the curved wall and stared upward. The ceiling emitted a soft white glow with no visible source. It did not flicker. It did not change. It simply existed, like an artificial sky that had never learned how to be anything else. Across from him, Kira sat in the same calm posture she had maintained since he woke. She had barely moved. This concerned him. Are you, Matteo said slowly, extremely patient, or am I extremely impatient? Her eyes shifted toward him. Yes, she said. Matteo blinked. He wasn't sure if that was humor, but he decided to take it as progress. His stomach tightened, reminding him that he had not eaten since before arriving on Aritus. He wondered if alien imprisonment included starvation as a feature or a side effect. He was about to ask when a faint sound echoed through the chamber, a low, almost musical vibration. Kira's head turned slightly toward the wall behind Matteo. He turned too. A thin, vertical seam appeared in the otherwise seamless stone. It was so precise it looked like reality itself had been folded open. From within, a narrow platform extended outward, carrying 2 small metallic containers. Matteo stared. Well, he said quietly, that's either food or a very polite bomb. The platform stopped. Nothing exploded. Matteo leaned forward cautiously and reached for one of the containers. It was smooth, warm to the touch, and surprisingly light. No visible lid, no visible mechanism. He tapped it gently. Nothing happened. He shook it slightly. Still nothing. He looked at Kira. She was watching him with mild curiosity. I assume, Matteo said, this is the part where I embarrass myself. She tilted her head slightly. He pressed his thumb against the surface. The container opened instantly, its upper layer dissolving into fine particles that vanished into the air, revealing a pale, translucent substance inside. Matteo stared at it. It shimmered faintly, like liquid crystal pretending to be food. He leaned closer and sniffed it. It had no smell. This is either extremely advanced nutrition, he said, or extremely advanced poison. Kira reached for the second container and opened it with smooth familiarity. She did not hesitate. She consumed it in small, measured portions. Matteo watched her carefully. She did not collapse. She did not die. She remained entirely functional. He nodded. Good enough for me. He took a cautious bite. The substance dissolved instantly on his tongue, releasing warmth that spread down his throat and into his chest. It had no flavor in the traditional sense, but it triggered something deeper, a sensation of fullness, of energy restored with quiet efficiency. He blinked. Well, he said, impressed, that's better than most military rations. Kira finished her portion and placed the empty container back onto the platform. It retracted into the wall and vanished. The seam closed. Silence returned. Matteo leaned back against the wall again, feeling slightly more human. He glanced at Kira. You've done this before, he said. It was not a question. She did not answer immediately. Instead, she studied the wall where the platform had disappeared. Yes, she said eventually. Matteo considered that. He had suspected as much. She was too calm, too observant, too comfortable in discomfort. He stretched his legs out carefully. His bare feet rested against the cold stone floor. I miss my boots, he said. Kira looked at his feet. Why? He stared at her. Why? She nodded. He gestured helplessly. They protect my feet. They provide stability. They complete my outfit. Without boots, I am just incomplete. She considered this seriously. Your survival depends on footwear? Yeah, Matteo said confidently. Emotionally. She watched him for a moment longer. Then, unexpectedly, her lips curved slightly. It was not a full smile, but it was close. Matteo felt an irrational sense of accomplishment. He leaned his head back again. The ceiling continued its perfect imitation of a sky that did not care. After some time, he spoke again. How long have you been here? Kira's eyes shifted toward him. She did not answer immediately. Long enough, she said. Matteo frowned. That is not a helpful unit of measurement. She said nothing. He nodded slowly. Fair. Silence settled between them again. But it was different now. Less heavy, less hostile. He studied her carefully. Her posture remained composed, but there was something beneath it. Not fear, not weakness. Control. She was not waiting passively. She was observing, calculating. Matteo recognized that look. He had seen it in experienced scouts, in commanders, in people who survived not by strength, but by understanding. He wondered who she had been before this cell. He wondered who she would be after. He cleared his throat. So, he said casually, on a scale from mildly inconvenient to catastrophically terrible, how would you rate our situation? She looked at him. Her eyes were steady. Undetermined, she said. Matteo nodded. That's fair. He leaned his head back and closed his eyes briefly. He was trapped on an alien world, captured by unknown forces, locked in a seamless chamber with an alien woman who spoke in precise, careful words and watched everything. He should have been afraid. He was afraid. But beneath the fear, something else existed. Curiosity. He opened his eyes again. Kira was still watching him, not with suspicion, not with hostility, but with interest. Matteo smiled faintly. Well, he said quietly, at least I'm not alone. Matteo decided on the fourth ration cycle that the chamber was lying to him. Not maliciously, not personally, but definitively. He stood in the center of the circular floor, arms crossed, staring at the wall with intense suspicion. It's bigger, he said. Kira, seated as usual against the curved surface, lifted her eyes toward him. It is not, she replied calmly. He gestured toward the wall behind him. It is. Yesterday, that curve was closer. She watched him for a moment. You measured it? He hesitated. No, he admitted, but I felt it. She tilted her head slightly, which he had begun to recognize as her equivalent of skepticism. Matteo crouched and pressed his palm flat against the stone. It was cool, smooth, uninterrupted. No seams, no texture, no imperfection. He knocked on it gently. The sound echoed back with dull, unhelpful confidence. Solid, he muttered. He leaned his forehead against it. I don't trust it. Kira said nothing. He pushed himself upright and began walking along the perimeter, dragging his fingertips lightly across the surface, as if expecting it to recoil. It did not. He completed the circle and stopped in front of her. It's definitely smaller, he said. She blinked once. You said it was bigger. He frowned. That was before. Her lips moved faintly again. He pointed at her. That was almost a smile. It was not. It absolutely was. She looked away. Matteo considered this a victory. He resumed pacing, his bare feet making soft sounds against the floor. He had grown used to the sensation, though he refused to accept it emotionally. Every few steps, he glanced at the ceiling, as if expecting it to descend without warning. You notice thing, he said suddenly. Her gaze returned to him. Yes. It was not pride, it was fact. He nodded. So do I, he said. For example, the ration platform arrives at consistent intervals, but the vibration that precedes it varies by approximately half a second. She studied him carefully now. Matteo gestured upward. The light never changes. No flicker, no dimming, no shift in intensity, which means it's not responding to environmental conditions. He tapped his temple. It's responding to us. Silence. He lowered his hand. The chamber adapts. Kira did not answer immediately. Instead, she rose slowly to her feet. Matteo watched her carefully. She moved with precise balance, conserving motion in a way he had come to admire. Every step she took had purpose, even when the purpose was simply to stand. She walked past him toward the wall where the ration platform usually appeared. She stopped. She placed her hand flat against the surface, closed her eyes. Matteo leaned slightly closer. What are you doing? Listening, she said. He blinked. With your hand? Yes. He considered trying this himself, but suspected he lacked the necessary qualifications. After a moment, she opened her eyes. It is not adapting randomly, she said. He waited. It is observing patterns. Matteo smiled faintly. I knew it. She glanced at him. You did not know it. I strongly suspected it. She accepted this without comment. He crossed his arms again. So, he said, we're inside a very polite machine that's studying us. Yes. He nodded slowly. That's deeply unsettling. She tilted her head. Why? He stared at her. Because I prefer machines that ignore me. She considered this. That would make them ineffective. He opened his mouth, closed it again. That is unfortunately correct. He walked back toward the center of the chamber. If it's observing pattern, he said, then it's collecting data. She nodded slightly. Behavioral analysis. He looked at her with renewed interest. You've encountered this before? She met his gaze. Yes. There was no elaboration. He respected that. Instead, he crouched and began tracing faint lines across the floor with his finger, mapping the chamber from memory. After a moment, she spoke. You are trying to understand it. He glanced up. I am trying to annoy it. She watched him. Why? He smiled faintly. Because if it's studying us, I want it to work for it. For the first time, she laughed. It was quiet, brief, almost involuntary, but it was unmistakable. Matteo froze. You laugh, he said. She composed herself immediately. No. You absolutely did. No. That was laughter. She looked away. He pointed at her again. I am making progress. She did not respond, but he noticed the faint shift in her posture. Less rigid, less distant. He leaned back against the wall beside her. They stood in silence for a while. Then he spoke again. Where I come from, he said, we study things we fear. She looked at him. Why? So we can stop fearing them. She considered this. And does it work? He thought about Earth, about its endless conflicts, its endless attempts to understand itself. Sometimes, he said. She nodded slowly. Her gaze drifted upward toward the artificial ceiling. This chamber is studying us, she said. Yes. She looked back at him. Then it is learning. He smiled faintly. Let's hope we're good teachers. She studied him carefully. Matteo Cross, barefoot and unarmed, stood inside an alien prison on a desert world at the edge of known space, making jokes at the expense of the machine holding him captive. He should not have been calm. He should not have been steady. But he was. And for the first time since her capture, Kira realized something unexpected. She was no longer the only one observing. Matteo woke to the sound of breathing, not his own. He did not move immediately. His training held him still, balanced between sleep and awareness, letting his senses assemble the world before his body committed to it. The chamber remained unchanged. Pale walls, artificial sky, cold, indifferent floor. Kira sat across from him, exactly where she had been when he fell asleep. Except now her eyes were open, and she was watching the ceiling. Matteo followed her gaze. Nothing had changed, or at least nothing obvious had changed. He sat up slowly and rubbed his face. "I had a dream," he said. She did not look at him. "What was it?" "I was wearing boots." She turned her head slightly. "That was the entire dream?" "Yes," he said. "They were excellent boots." She studied him for a moment. "You miss them." "I do," he admitted. "They understood me." Her expression shifted faintly. "You assign emotional value to footwear." "Yes." She considered this without judgment. He leaned back against the wall and exhaled. He had begun to notice subtle rhythms in the chamber. Not visual rhythms, not auditory rhythms, behavioral rhythms. The ration platform had appeared 3 times since his capture. Each time, the vibration preceding it had grown slightly quieter, as if the chamber were refining its movements. Learning efficiency, learning discretion, learning them. He glanced at Kira. She had noticed it too. He could tell. She noticed everything. Her gaze returned to the ceiling. Matteo frowned. "You've been staring at that for a while." "Yes." He waited. "That light," she said, "does not originate from above." He blinked. "That seems unlikely." She gestured faintly. "It originates from within the walls." He looked around. The illumination appeared uniform, shadowless, perfect. "How can you tell?" She paused. "Because it reacts." He followed her eyes again. He waved his hand cautiously. The light did not flicker. It did not dim. It did not change. He lowered his hand. "It didn't react." "It did," she said. He looked at her. "You are very difficult to impress." She tilted her head slightly. "You are very easy to entertain." He smiled faintly. "That's fair." He pushed himself to his feet and began walking slowly along the perimeter again, dragging his fingertips against the surface. "I've been thinking," he said. She watched him. "This chamber isn't just studying behavior." He stopped. "It's studying restraint." She said nothing. He turned to face her. "It hasn't harmed us." "Yes." "It hasn't restrained us physically." "Yes." "It hasn't communicated." "Yes." He spread his hands. "It's waiting." Silence. She stood slowly. Matteo watched her carefully. Her posture shifted again. Not defensive, not aggressive. Focused. She stepped toward the center of the chamber. Stopped. Closed her eyes. Matteo frowned. "You're doing the listening thing again?" "Yes." He waited. The chamber remained silent, unmoving, watching. She opened her eyes. "It wants to see what we do without pressure." Matteo blinked. "That's unsettlingly polite." She turned toward him. "Pressure reveals instinct. Absence of pressure reveals intent." He considered that. He had spent his life in structured environments, missions, orders, objectives. He had rarely experienced absence of pressure. He leaned against the wall. "Well," he said, "my intent is currently to avoid dying." She watched him carefully. "That is a reasonable intent." He nodded. "I'm full of reasonable ideas." She studied him in silence. Then she said, "You adapt quickly." He shrugged. "I panic internally." She tilted her head. "That is not visible." "I have excellent internal panic." For the briefest moment, her lips curved again. Matteo noticed. He always noticed. He crouched suddenly and pressed both palms flat against the floor. The surface was smooth, seamless, but not dead. He could feel it. Not movement, not vibration, awareness. He looked up at her. "It's not just observing us," he said quietly. She stepped closer. "No." He swallowed. It's aware of us. She met his eyes. Yes. He sat back slowly. He should have felt fear. Instead, he felt something else. Recognition. He had spent his life exploring unknown environments, unknown systems, unknown intelligences. This was no different. Except this time, he was inside the system. He leaned his head back against the wall and stared at the artificial sky again. I wonder what it thinks of us. She followed his gaze. It is still deciding. He nodded slowly. I hope I'm making a good impression. She looked at him. You are unpredictable. He smiled faintly. I've been called worse. Silence settled again, but it was no longer empty. It was shared. He glanced at her. She stood beside him now, not across the chamber, not distant, closer. He wasn't sure when that had happened, or why, but he didn't question it. After a while, he spoke again. Where I come from, he said quietly, we believe intelligence reveals itself through curiosity. She turned toward him. And fear? He nodded. Yes. She studied him carefully. You are afraid? He did not deny it. Yes. She nodded once. So am I. He looked at her. For the first time since he had met her, her calm did not feel like certainty. It felt like discipline. And somehow that made her feel more real, not less. He smiled faintly. Well, he said, at least we're afraid together. Her eyes remained on his. Yes. The chamber continued to observe, and for the first time, neither of them felt entirely alone inside it. Matteo realized he had stopped thinking about escape. This disturbed him. Not because escape was impossible. He had been in impossible situations before. He had escaped from a drifting cargo hull with no propulsion, once survived 3 days trapped inside a malfunctioning atmospheric processor, and endured a diplomatic dinner with 17 planetary delegates who communicated exclusively through interpretive silence. This was worse, because he was adapting. He sat on the smooth floor, leaning back against the curved wall, staring at the artificial sky that had never changed and somehow now felt familiar. His bare feet rested comfortably against the stone. He hated that. I think, he said aloud, this place is trying to domesticate me. Kira sat beside him now instead of across from him, her posture calm, her eyes focused on nothing and everything at once. Explain, she said. He gestured vaguely at the chamber. It feeds me, shelters me, studies me. He paused. I'm becoming an indoor creature. She considered this. You were always an indoor creature. He frowned. That is deeply offensive. She tilted her head slightly. You rely on artificial atmosphere, artificial gravity, artificial protection. He opened his mouth, closed it. That is technically accurate, he admitted. She returned her gaze to the chamber. You are adapted for survival through systems. He studied her. And you aren't? She did not answer immediately. Instead, she reached down and pressed her palm against the floor again. Matteo watched her carefully. She did this often now, touching the chamber, listening to it, or perhaps allowing it to listen to her. It learns, she said quietly. He nodded. Yes. It has changed. He frowned. How? She looked at him. It responds faster. He thought about that. The ration platform had indeed appeared more smoothly each time. The faint vibration preceding it had diminished. The timing had grown precise, efficient, comfortable. He leaned forward and placed his own hand flat against the surface beside hers. He expected nothing, but he felt something, not movement, not vibration, recognition. He pulled his hand back instinctively. Kira noticed. You felt it. It was not a question. He nodded slowly. Yes. She studied him carefully. It recognizes you. He let out a quiet breath. That is both flattering and terrifying. She tilted her head. Why terrifying? He smiled faintly. Because I have no idea what it plans to do with that information. Silence settled again. Matteo leaned back against the wall and closed his eyes briefly. He had begun to understand the chamber's rhythm. It was not static. It was not passive. It was engaged. He opened his eyes and glanced at Kira. She had changed too. Not physically, but subtly. Her posture was less guarded now, her shoulders less rigid, her gaze less distant. She trusted him. He wasn't sure when that had happened or why. He cleared his throat. So, he said casually, hypothetically speaking, if we were to escape, she looked at him immediately. Hypothetically, he nodded. Yes, hypothetically. She waited. He gestured toward the seamless wall. I have no plan. She blinked once. That is not a plan. It is the foundation of a plan. She studied him carefully. You improvise. Yes. That is inefficient. It is extremely efficient when you don't have better options. She considered this. He leaned forward again. This chamber observes patterns, he said. It adapts. It learns. She nodded. Yes. He smiled faintly. Then we teach it the wrong lesson. She watched him. How? He stood suddenly, walked to the center of the chamber, sat down, stood up again, walked in a circle, sat down again. Kira followed his movements with quiet attention. He lay flat on the floor, stared at the ceiling, then sat up again. This, he said, is unpredictable behavior. She tilted her head. This is irrational behavior. He smiled. Exactly. She watched him for a long moment. Then unexpectedly, she stood, walked to the center of the chamber, and sat beside him. He blinked. You are participating. Yes. He nodded approvingly. Excellent. They sat there together in silence, doing nothing, doing everything, teaching the chamber nothing useful. He glanced at her. This may be the least productive mission I have ever participated in. She looked at him. You are still alive. He smiled faintly. That makes it a success. She studied him carefully. You find comfort in survival. Yes. She looked down at her hands briefly. Survival is not always enough. He considered that. No, he said quietly. It isn't. Silence returned, but it was no longer empty. It was understanding. After a while, he spoke again. You never told me how you were captured. Her eyes lifted to meet his. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she said, I allowed it. He blinked. That seems like a poor decision. She did not smile. It was necessary. He frowned. For what? She did not answer. He nodded slowly. Fair enough. He lay back on the floor again, staring at the artificial sky. The chamber remained silent, watching, learning. He wondered what conclusions it was forming. He wondered what conclusions she was forming. He turned his head slightly. She was still sitting beside him, closer than before, not distant, not alone. He smiled faintly. Well, he said quietly, if this is captivity, I've experienced worse company. She looked at him. For a moment, her calm expression softened. You are unusual, she said. He nodded. I've been warned. The chamber listened and continued to learn. Matteo noticed the silence first, not the normal silence of the chamber, not the patient, observant silence he had grown used to. This silence was different. It was waiting. He sat upright slowly, his eyes scanning the curved walls, the artificial sky, the seamless floor. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had changed. Kira stood near the wall, her palm pressed flat against the surface. Her posture was rigid now, focused in a way he had not seen before. It knows, she said quietly. Matteo blinked. That narrows it down to everything and nothing. She did not look at him. It has finished observing. He frowned. That sounds ominous. She lowered her hand. The chamber vibrated, not the soft, polite vibration of the ration platform. This was deeper, structural, a resonance that passed through the floor and into Matteo's bones. He stood immediately. Well, he said, I would like to formally request that it stop doing that. The vibration intensified briefly, then stopped. Silence returned, but now it felt thinner. Matteo looked around carefully. You ever get the feeling, he said, that something just made a decision about you? Yes, she said. He exhaled slowly. Good. I hate being the only one uncomfortable. The wall behind them shifted, not opening, not separating, rearranging. The stone did not crack or split. It flowed, folding inward like liquid remembering how to be solid. A vertical aperture formed, revealing darkness beyond. Matteo stared. Well, he said quietly, that's new. Kira stepped forward. He reached out instinctively. Wait. She paused. He swallowed. We don't know what's out there. She looked at him. Yes. That doesn't concern you? It does. He frowned. You're very calm about it. She studied him for a moment. Calm is not the absence of fear. He nodded slowly. That explains a lot. The opening remained, waiting. Matteo glanced at the chamber behind them. For the first time since his capture, the chamber was no longer containing them. It was releasing them. He gestured toward the aperture. After you. She tilted her head slightly. You are the scout. He smiled faintly. And you have better instincts. She did not argue. She stepped forward. He followed. The corridor beyond was unlike the chamber. It was darker, its surfaces less smooth, more organic. The walls curved in irregular patterns, glowing faintly with internal luminescence. The air felt cooler here, alive. Matteo walked carefully beside her, his senses straining to understand the environment. No guards, he whispered. Yes. No restraints. Yes. He frowned. That's either very good or very bad. She continued forward. The corridor opened into a larger chamber. Matteo stopped. Figures stood waiting, tall, armored, silent. Their forms were unmistakable, the same beings who had emerged from the sand. Their pale armor reflected the faint light, their posture precise and controlled. Matteo froze. Well, he said quietly, this is familiar and unpleasant. None of them moved. None of them raised weapons. They stood still, waiting. Kira stepped forward. Matteo reached out again instinctively, but stopped himself. Something had changed. He could see it in her posture, in the way she held herself. She was no longer adapting to the environment. The environment was adapting to her. One of the armored figures stepped forward. Then slowly, deliberately, it knelt. Matteo blinked. I'm sorry, he whispered. What? Another figure knelt, then another, and another, all of them lowering themselves in precise, synchronized motion. Not submission, recognition. Matteo looked at Kira. She stood motionless, calm, certain. The armored figure at the front removed its helmet. Beneath it was a face unlike any Matteo had seen, human in structure, but refined. Their long ears curved elegantly backward, their eyes sharp with intelligence and something deeper. The figure spoke. The language was unfamiliar, its tones precise and resonant. Matteo did not understand the words, but he understood the meaning. Reverence. He looked at Kira again. You know them. She did not answer immediately. Instead, she stepped forward. The kneeling figure lowered its head further. She spoke. Her voice was different now. Not louder, not harsher, but heavier. Each word carried weight, authority. Matteo felt it without understanding it. The chamber, the prison, the observation. It had never been random. It had never been accidental. It had been preparation. He swallowed. Kira, he said quietly. She turned toward him. Her expression was unchanged. But now he could see it. The thing that had always been there. Not just calm, not just control. Power. He exhaled slowly. You're not just a prisoner. She held his gaze. No, she said softly. The kneeling figures remained motionless, waiting. For her, not for him. For her. Matteo ran a hand through his hair. Well, he said faintly, that explains a lot. She watched him carefully. I did not lie to you. He shook his head. No. She had not. She had simply never told him the truth. He laughed quietly, not out of amusement, out of realization. I spent 2 weeks teaching unpredictable behavior to someone who apparently commands armies. Her expression softened slightly. Yes. He nodded slowly. That feels like an important detail. The kneeling figures remained silent, waiting for her next command. Matteo looked at her, at Kira, who was no longer simply Kira, and he realized something else. She was still watching him, not as a subject, not as a subordinate, but as an equal. And somehow that mattered more than everything else. The desert of Aritus did not look different when Matteo stepped outside. It was still endless, still pale, still alive in its quiet, unsettling way. The twin suns hung above, exactly as they had on the day of his capture, as if the planet itself had not noticed that anything significant had happened. Matteo stood barefoot on the smooth stone platform that emerged from beneath the sand, trying very hard to process the fact that an army stood behind him. Not metaphorically, literally. Hundreds of armored figures waited in perfect formation, their pale armor gleaming under the merciless light. Their weapons remained lowered, their posture remained still, and every single one of them was waiting for the woman standing beside him. Kira. Number. Not just Kira. He glanced sideways at her. She stood exactly as she had in the chamber, calm, balanced, composed. The desert wind moved gently across her hair, and her long ears caught the light in subtle arcs. She did not look like someone who commanded armies. She looked like someone who listened to silence and understood it. Matteo cleared his throat. "So," he said quietly, "I assume this is the part where you explain everything." She looked at him. There was no distance in her gaze, no superiority, just honesty. "My name is Kiralei," she said. He nodded slowly. "Queen Kiralei," he added. She did not correct him. He exhaled. "I suspected something," he admitted. "You were entirely too calm about starvation and possible death." "I was not calm," she said. He blinked. "You were the calmest person I have ever met." She tilted her head slightly. "I was disciplined." He smiled faintly. "That explains the difference." The armored figures behind them remained motionless, silent witnesses to a conversation they could not interrupt. He gestured vaguely toward them. "You allowed yourself to be captured." "Yes," he frowned. "That still seems like a poor decision." She looked out across the desert. "Our people have always ruled from distance," she said quietly. "From safety, from certainty." She paused. "I needed to understand what it meant to have none of those things." He studied her. "So you put yourself in a box?" "Yes." He nodded slowly. "That's one way to learn humility." She looked at him. "It is the only way to learn truth." Silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, not uncertain, complete. Matteo rubbed the back of his neck. "I spent 2 weeks complaining about imaginary shrinking walls to the most powerful individual on this planet." She said nothing. He looked at her carefully. "You never corrected me. You never asked." He laughed quietly. "That's fair." A transport vessel waited behind them now, its curved structure partially submerged beneath the sand like a creature resting between breaths. Its surface shimmered with active camouflage, bending light subtly around its form. Matteo stared at it. "That was there the whole time, wasn't it?" "Yes." He nodded. "I am very observant." She allowed the faintest trace of a smile. He noticed it. He always noticed it. The desert wind shifted, carrying heat and distant whispers across the endless horizon. Matteo looked down at his bare feet. "I would like my boots back," he said. She followed his gaze. "That can be arranged." He nodded seriously. "Excellent. I perform significantly better with emotional support footwear." She studied him in silence. Then she said, "You treated me as an equal." He looked at her. "You were an equal." "I was not," she said quietly. "I was your queen." He shook his head. "No," he said. "You were a person in a bad situation." She held his gaze. "And that is why you survived." He frowned slightly. "I survived because you taught me how to listen." She blinked once. He gestured vaguely toward the desert. "I spent my entire career observing environments," he said, "studying systems, predicting behavior." He paused. "You taught me to observe people." Silence. The army waited. The desert waited. She stepped closer. Not as a queen, not as a ruler, as Kira. "You changed me," she said quietly. He blinked. "I did." "Yes." He smiled faintly. "I mostly complained about food." "You showed me leadership without distance," she said. He did not have a joke for that. For once. He looked out across the endless desert again. Aritus was no longer a hostile unknown. It was simply a place where he had been captured, a place where he had survived, a place where he had changed. He looked back at her. What happens now? She gestured toward the waiting transport. You return to your people. He nodded slowly. And you? I returned to mine. He hesitated. The question sat between them, unspoken. Then he said it anyway. Will I see you again? She studied him carefully, not as a subject, not as a curiosity, as Matteo. Yes, she said, not a promise, a certainty. He smiled. That's good. The transport opened, its surface unfolding seamlessly, inviting him inside. He took a step forward, then stopped. He turned back to her. For 2 weeks they had been prisoners, equals, two minds in a silent chamber, teaching each other how to exist without certainty. He had entered that chamber as a scout. He left it as something else, someone who understood that leadership was not authority, it was presence. He nodded once. She nodded back. No ceremony, no distance, just understanding. He stepped into the transport. Behind him, Queen Kiralei turned toward her army. But for a moment longer she remained simply Kira. And far above them, the twin sons of Aridus burned on, indifferent to titles, witnessing only survival.